Welcome to the Undiscovered Gems podcast, hosted by NBA legend and business powerhouse Charles D. Smith, highlighting today's best and brightest business minds.
Hi, and I'm your host, Charles Smith. Welcome to Undiscovered Gems. We have a full-service interior designer today, MaryJo Major. She's been in the industry for 20 years plus. Not only is she a full-service interior designer, but full service meaning she designs according to your interests, your health, or whatever you feel your space needs. She can do it. MaryJo, welcome to the show today. Great to have you.
Hi, Charles. Great to be here. I'm so glad I'm here.
Yes, and you're out of DC, huh? Washington,
Yes,
DC.
I am. It's a little cold today, but I'm here.
Well, I'm up here in Connecticut. It's cold here too, so
Oh, yes.
I feel your pain.
Yes.
MaryJo, 20
Yeah.
years in the industry. How did you get into the industry, and what were you doing prior to?
You know, Charles, I am one of those rare cases where I kind of knew what I wanted to do at a really early age. In fact, my mom has in one of my kind of scrapbooks, if you will, a picture that I wrote when I was 11 saying that I wanted to be an interior designer. So I kind of knew I had an early on trajectory. This was it. So
Wow.
I actually got started kind of earlier than most in that I, right out of high school, started interning for a commercial interior design firm. And even prior to that was, always interested in art or beauty, all the kinds of things that I think are kind of the backdrop of design.
Well, before I get into the business aspect of it, I want to understand you being a part of, you have a creative mind.
Yes.
So what were some of the things, give us a little bit more information on some of those things that migrated you toward your career in interior design? Because like you said, at 11, what were some of the creative things? What were you as a child and coming up through your teenage years that kind of kept you in this space? What did you do?
Sure. I've always really loved artwork. I'm an avid artist, and I would say that has dipped a little bit in the last few years. I have a few young children, so my time is a little limited on my hobbies. But
Sure.
I grew up doing a lot of different artwork, and in fact, in high school, I went to a specific high school that was a performing arts high school, and so I studied artwork there, and through that, I really got more and more interested in a form of artwork called collage, where you take lots of different textures and colors and pieces and kind of fit them together. And I loved that type of work as well as abstract painting. And my artwork, I kind of go back and forth between both. But what interior design does, and the more I started to think about, how does my creativity channel into a career of some sort? How does what I love to do kind of actually help people live better? I realized that interior design in some ways is one big art piece. And when it's done well, it is similar to, there's something called installation art that's supposed to be interactive with people when they kind of come into it.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's essentially kind of what I think about. All the different scales, proportions, colors, textures, how lighting affects the room, the feelings that you have. I think all of those things play a role in design and in some ways art. And so they kind of, in some ways, it was an extension of my own artwork.
Wow. So when you talk about your artwork being, at the end of the day, the atmospheres, the environments, the spaces is one big piece of art.
Yes.
Give us an example of a client that has come to you, let's say, in need of a relaxing space. What's your intake? How do you go through the process with a client to give them what they need?
Yes, that's a great question. So many times I'll start with, just real basics, because a lot of times people can't always articulate what feelings are, in their mind. So I usually start with some things like, what are your favorite colors? And then I'll start to get into things like, what do you gravitate towards? Because it's funny, a lot of people, I would say, they usually say something along the lines of, I can tell you, I can't really tell you what I like, but I can tell you what I don't like. So they usually
Mm.
can say, okay, I don't like this and I don't like this, but I'm having a hard time pinning myself down. And so I usually, surprisingly, people usually have kind of clues in their own home of what they like and what is kind of relaxing. So when I go to their homes, I'll usually kind of pick up on those cues of if they have a lot of things or if they have specific things. I'll start questioning like, oh, I see this. Tell me more about, what is this about? Was this a gift? Was this something from your grandmother's? Trying to get out of them some more just stories of their own home. And then from there, I'll kind of usually tease out, all right, so for you, relaxation means something similar in colors all over, not a lot of pattern, and something
Hmm.
that has marble, specific textures that feel to them relaxing. And, Charles, it's funny because I had a client once. This is, I guess, going in that line of what my own misconceptions sometimes of relaxation versus what I'm trying to get from the client. As I had a client who wanted me to help them with their living room and it to be relaxing. And so I was selecting all these different things and I went to kind of go over different options with them. And something that came up was we had picked out more of a neutral rug. Well, she told me that in our meeting that her growing up years was in an all white home and they weren't allowed to touch anything or have any food or anything. So neutral
Right.
things actually caused her anxiety. So whereas you and I might think of relaxation as like, lots of white colors, white to her was like this panic color. So anyway, it's super important to me to figure out, yeah, not make any assumptions on my end, but more from the client, like what actually, yeah, what is that for them?
You're talking about more, believe it or not, I think you're talking about a lot of medical and health healing. When you
Yeah.
just said people know what they don't like,
Yep.
but not necessarily know what they like, or they're telling you stories about what they don't like or things that do things negatively to them. I've had a lot of podcasts in this thing today with healing from environments and spaces and being healing from the emotional side, healing from the inside. Most
Yeah.
doctors heal from a physical side. They want to give you medications and they don't heal from inside out. And
Right.
the work that you're doing is actually therapy at the end of the day when people are sitting in your space that you've designed for them and they got the colors that they like. Maybe it's the music, ambient music in the background, but that tends to be a healing place for them. Do you see it like that? Do you look at it in that way?
Yes, I do. Charles, I think a lot of people don't realize how much their space affects their mental health. I think
Hmm.
that it's, you want to make sure that your house has enough storage for stuff. You have other things in mind when you're thinking about what your house needs. And of course, you want it to look good. I think that everyone was home, they want it to feel welcoming and
Right.
they can be proud of it. But there is a sense of, uh, yeah, relaxation or just like a lack of anxiety, maybe more of a what is lacking. There's a lack of like all the stress and the anxiety, like it is more calming. I mean, I even had a client once tell me after we'd finished her home, she was so sweet. She said, you know, she's like, this might sound silly, but she's like, sometimes I'll just sit and I'll just be drinking my coffee and I'll just be looking around and I just take like this big sigh because
That's
it
great.
feels like me and I just love being here. And that, it's hard to kind of verbalize like what that feeling is, right? Is
Right.
yes, it is. I mean, you could say it's healing. It also is just like this sense of rest,
Hmm.
and this sense of safety and this sense of, yeah, you don't, this idea of what comfort means, I think also translates to what's also not as anxiety or stress producing. And, Charles, I would say too, how you get to that, how you get to a house looking and feeling that way, I would say is also something that I like to focus on, because I do think that people's, they know where what they want it to look in the end, but I think sometimes they don't realize that the journey to get there can also be stressless. Because
Right.
most of the time people, that's a lot of the reason why people will come to me, actually, is because this idea of they want to do it once and they want to do it right is anxiety producing.
Right. Right.
And they're
Right.
like, I don't know what to do and I don't want to make any mistakes. And so, yeah, I feel like that's part of my role, is to kind of help them have a really wonderful experience getting to the restful place in the process of also, having a relaxing journey.
Yeah. Do shapes matter? You talk about colors,
Yeah.
but what about shapes, corners, curves?
Oh,
How do
yeah.
you deal with that with clients? Because
Okay.
it, I think it matters.
Yeah.
How do you know it matters with a client?
Well, I usually will, again, I kind of take some cues from what they have, because sometimes people inadvertently will pick things subconsciously that they kind of resonate with. So a lot of times people, I mean, in fact, I just had one client that I'm working with that kind of told me she prefers, more square things, more things with corners.
Mm,
And I heard her, I understand. And yet when a home has all of the same edges, it does bring a certain, yeah, just a certain look to it. And I knew that where she wanted to go didn't correlate with that, with all having all
sure.
square edges. So what I'll do is I'll usually incorporate kind of softer things. So for example, her dining room chairs have like a little bit of a curve. It's still a rectangle, but the edges have a little bit of a curve to them. Or her coffee table is a rectangle coffee table, but it kind of has it has two kind of curved edges on the top. So there's some ways you can kind of
Sure.
complement it, because it does matter. I would say that the best formula is a mix. And it doesn't have to be 50-50, but to have at least a couple things that break up all the edges, or to have a couple of the edges that break up all the round, it helps the room just feel more cohesive, and it does create kind of a balance.
Good. Nice. Nice. How
Yeah.
do you deal with procurement? Do you have relationships with a lot of outlets, factories? I don't manufacturing places. I don't know. How does that work for
Yeah.
you? Because sometimes you get some clients that want things yesterday. Some are like, just deal with it. I'll come when I see you. Just make it work.
Right, right,
How do
right,
you
right.
deal with the process of selecting the actual pieces and the timing of getting them?
Yes. You know, yeah, that's a that's a good question, Charles. I feel like since COVID, let me preface this. So things were a certain way, and then during COVID, there were so many just out of control, like things you couldn't control, kind of variables that happen. And then I feel like
Right.
we're kind of in a post-COVID supply chain. So during COVID, I kind of there were many vendors that I work with, that are
Mhm.
trade only. So they work directly to designers or people in that field. And there were certain ones that I feel like had ways to kind of move around different difficulties, and then other ones that were more stuck. So since then, I've kind of, again, kind of selected or kind of configured kind of who are my primary people who I know can be consistent. And with the
Mhm.
deadline thing, I usually tell people that it typically takes from the time of when the design is finished to getting your furniture, I mean, anywhere from like 3 to 6 months, which sounds like a big pill to swallow. And it usually comes in faster than that. But I say the 6 month part because there are times when you do have
Mm.
something that you want and then it gets delayed and you can't really control that. And so that kind of in your brain, knowing that it might take a little bit longer for certain things kind of eases the pain. But yes, I've even had one client who I think we rented furniture for a little bit, or we talked about it because they needed something right away and it just wasn't going to be here and like
Right.
for a while. But I do also kind of recommend to my clients like this, my job is to give you kind of what makes the most sense for you within your budget and your style. So I think of it more a little bit like a crock pot and not like a microwave process where
Okay.
it's better to go a little bit slower because the result is so much richer and it's going to be a lot lasting. Than I would much rather do that than you spend all your money on my services to just get Target furniture that then doesn't, no offense to Target, but it doesn't have the longevity that these other pieces will.
Sure.
And so as much as I'd like to see you again in 2 years when I have to redesign it all because the
Right.
pieces don't hold up, I really want, again, this idea of experience. I really want this experience, in 3 years, you still are happy with what you invested in. And it's not something where you're like, gosh, I know we wanted it fast, but we would have totally waited an extra 3 weeks if we would have known it would have been X, better. That's kind of
Sure.
how I
Sure.
handle that.
Sure. You mentioned providing an experience for your clients going through the process, and you want it to be a good experience.
Yes. Yes.
But the word experience, how did you, and what point in your career did you get the most amount of experience on the business side as you went through your career? Where did your experience come from?
Yeah, I mean, I still feel like I'm getting experience.
Hmm.
I would say it's funny, Charles. So when I first graduated from interior design school, I desperately wanted to work in the commercial interior design industry. But at that time, it was during the financial recession, and there just weren't any jobs. Like I remember my
Sure.
professors literally told us to go to grad school. There just wasn't anything.
Right.
So what I had to do is I had to just be creative. And I worked for a reupholstery little company. I worked for a mom and pop, other kind of little shop. I worked for like a very, very early on interior design virtual company. And I did work for a little bit for a residential designer. And I feel like all of those experiences, including retail, I did retail, all of those
Mm.
experiences kind of gave me, some of this knowledge that otherwise I wouldn't have. And then in terms of right now, like how I've gotten to where I am, a few years into working for myself, I just realized that I just needed some more support. They don't always teach you the best business stuff in interior design school. They,
Sure.
so I hired a business consultant, to really help me know how to do things well and to know how to really provide for my clients well, because I realized that was something that I just needed more support with. And that's something, again, as a small business owner, you're actively realizing like, this is where I really shine. And then these are the places that I just need some more support. So how can I get some help in here of, whether that's a consultant or whether that's hiring someone, whatever that is, how can I get that so that my experience again is a really positive one.
Right. Um, how do you deal with budgeting with your clients? Because you
Yeah.
mentioned, and I'll say the same thing, no offense to Target, but you when you look at budgeting,
Yeah.
a lot of clients, most clients, you'll
Mhm.
get, to correct me if I'm wrong, will want more for less. That's just human nature.
Yeah.
How do you manage dealing with a client
Yeah.
that you can tell does want more for less, and but you actually know what they're looking for and they need to pay more? How do you juggle that?
Yeah, I know. That's such a tricky situation. So most of the time, these types of experiences are fairly new to someone, right? They don't
Hmm.
usually furnish their own home or they do things all at once. So it's kind of like going to a car dealership with $5,000 and saying, "I want this brand new car." You just don't
Right.
know. So a lot of times it depends on the client and it depends on kind of how they prefer to work. But I really do try to meet people where they are. And so whether that's just a consult or whether that's saying, okay, listen, based off your budget, this is where I feel like I can really give you the best design input and design experience within your
Right.
means.
Right.
And then at the same time, in terms of, kind of furniture and things like that, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll say, let's design everything. Like, let's give you kind of the big roadmap. Let's let you see how it's all going to look together. And then let's just go slow. Like, let's go in phases. And you just kind of go in these little kind of rooms at a time. I'm a pretty big supporter of doing things one at a time, because what I found is that when you do kind of a little bit all over, what happens to your mental health, again, going back to your own stress and your own, how you feel in a space, you walk in and you feel like you've spent all this money, and yet each room you go into in your head, all you have to think about is all the other things you have to get. So it becomes this kind of this other, like, okay, I just did all this work, but it doesn't feel like anything's done. Like, it feels like, it's very deflating actually to have your home not really finished, but you've just spent all this time in like little pieces here and there. So what I really try to encourage my clients, and part of my process, is that you just do one room at a time. So we say, okay, based off your budget, based off of everything we have, this is a priority space. So let's just start here. Let's just start small. Let's do this room. Let's get it looking exactly the way we want. And then we can just move forward. And it's based off of, their own perception. And a lot of times it's like a snowball, when you have one room that looks exactly the way you want, you're like, okay, all right, I'm ready. Let's do it again. So it is a process, but I do feel like in terms of budget, you just meet them where they are, but you also make sure that, again, at the end, I'm really trying to protect them from, at the end, having any sort of bad taste in their mouth. And so I communicate that, like, hey, in order to give you the best experience, this is what I recommend. And this is how I recommend we work together. And most of my clients are really on board with that. Like, I don't really have any people that push back or say that's not for me. And I do have services where I like kind of give them some tools, and they can kind of implement it themselves. So, and that also kind of meets them where they are. And so that in 3 years, if they want to move forward with something, I've given them kind of what they need to go on.
Sure. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Capacity.
Yeah.
What size projects do you work? What's your range of projects that you work on? Or at least give us an example of your range as well.
Yeah.
Of some projects you worked on.
Well, it's funny you mentioned range. When the first thing that came to mind of just simple, square footage amounts. I live in DC, so there's a lot of people here that have more modest, I would say, homes than other parts in America. So the smallest space I have worked on is a studio that was, I could be off by a handful of square feet, but I think it was around like 350 square feet. It's pretty small.
Wow.
Pretty small. It was on Capitol Hill. And then the biggest that I've ever worked on is a new build that was in a different part of the city that was 8,000 square feet. And so I would say that I have the kind of flexibility to do kind of the small or the larger. I would say that, I'm, because I was trained in commercial, that, again, those are really big spaces. I'm doing kind of a smaller commercial project right now, actually, that's more of just kind of the finishing details. But that I think that is like maybe 3,000 square feet. So I don't know, Charles. I feel like I don't know if you could say I'm a one size fits all, but I do feel like I'm comfortable with kind of smaller or larger. I haven't done anything, I lived in a few parts of the United States that have, those 17,000 square foot homes. Like I am familiar with like the really huge homes. I don't know if that's exactly my field, but that's not to say that I wouldn't entertain talking to someone about it.
Gotcha. Do you feel that what are some of the, how is technology impacting your industry based on what you were doing 15, 20 years ago and today? How has technology enabled you to be more creative?
Right. Oh gosh, so much stuff, Charles. So I would say just some of the things that are coming to mind, because there's a few different things. One is just sourcing, just being able to have access and knowledge of a lot of different sources that wasn't there before. So I do go to, there's a massive design kind of market, if you will, in High Point, North Carolina, that's twice a year, that has over 10 million square feet of showroom space. And that's just a lot of I mean, that's a lot of square feet, right? Like there's no way I can see all that product in the span of 4 days, right? Like that's kind of crazy. So, but it's helpful. I mean, yeah, just having access to people's catalogs online, different, even I would say social media, just having access to inspiration or just other things that are happening in
Sure.
trends like that wasn't a thing. And I would, one of the big ones, actually, I just talked about this with my business consultant in a strategy meeting, was AI. Like I
Mm-hmm.
do think that there's a lot of fear around it. And I understand from a creative why there's fear around it. I also feel like there's some harnessing power. So for
Mm-hmm.
example, like trying to find specifically, well, going back to sourcing, trying to find specifically a table that's this size, that's this look, that's, made in America or whatever I want to say about it, and seeing what AI comes up with instead of me spending hours maybe trying to find
Wow.
items, like let me see what it can do for me. And just
Sure.
kind of, again, give me the tools I need to show people. And one last thing, and I know we're almost out of time, but I would say also just being able to show someone what a room can look like, having
Oh
kind
yeah, I
of,
love that. I love that.
yes, they do take time, and they are like kind of an extra fee, and at least in my world, but they really, really help just someone see what it's going to be. And and again, going back to investment and going back to just this trust and knowing that what you see kind of 2D is actually 3D wise going to really feel like you. I think that
Yes.
those 3D models are a huge part of that. And those were back, I mean, we had those, whatever it was, 15 years ago, but the sophistication of what they look like now looks real good. And I actually know some people that are going back a little bit and trying to do hand renderings because people want a little bit more of that personal touch, or that
Mm-hmm.
almost like non perfect, view of their space. But I think that, yeah, any sort of visual aid in that realm is super helpful for technology.
Right. And you mentioned that we're coming to a close, but I got to get one more question in,
Yeah.
and that's based on you being an interior designer. And we talked earlier about it's really you're designing for the interior of the person instead of the exterior. It's their mind, their heart, and what they
Yeah.
want.
Yeah.
Um, when you're looking at your clients in the industry as a whole,
Hmm.
what is the ideal client that you look at and say, "Oh, that's my sweet spot"?
Oh, someone who trusts me.
Okay.
Yeah, someone who trusts me. I mean, yes, there is, just like, we were mentioning earlier, there is a cost associated with designing your home and
Yes.
creating kind of the craft. But I would say if you trust me, then I would love to work with you, because that, because this is such a long journey, it takes months. And because I'm really trying to tease out kind of what really makes them tick, there is this level of trust that you have to know that I'm not going to misguide you, and I'm not going to kind of at the end give you something you don't want. I really,
Right.
mm, I really want the experience, and I really want the outcome be to be something that really gets you excited and just makes
Right.
you happy. And so, yeah, I really try uh, to. That's honestly, that's one of the big things that I look at when I'm talking with people, is if they can, if there's any sort of mistrust. And sometimes, unfortunately, there's some bad experiences with other designers, because I just like any industry, I think there's some
Sure.
trust of others. But yeah, trust is a huge one.
Got it. Well, Mary Jo, we are running out of time. And now the audience know why you're the professional of the year. You've been in the industry for 20 years, and your passion, your desire, and your love for your career is not a career. It's not even a job to you. It's who you are.
No, thank you.
Thank you
Yeah,
for coming on the show,
thanks, Charles.
and really appreciate the knowledge that you imparted on our audience today.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care, MaryJo.
Thank you.
Continue success.
Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Undiscovered Gems with our host, Charles D. Smith, highlighting today's best and brightest business minds. Brought to you by Pods Entertainment Group.